the second kind of pattern of damage with these tiny little circular holes that you can see throughout the entire painting. And these are due to damage caused by woodworm. So the larvae of the woodworm would live inside the panel and they would slowly eat their way out. All these little holes are where the woodworm have been released into the wild, as it were. But all of those little holes had old fill, so we haven't got any new holes and any new woodworm, thankfully.
My name is Hayley Tomlinson.
And my name's Alysia Sawicka.
And we are paintings conservators at the National Gallery. And this is our current project. It's a painting of the Martyrdom of Saint Sebastian by the Pollaiuolo brothers. Now, it was two of the brothers that painted this, Piero del Pollaiuolo, who was the elder brother, and Piero del Pollaiuolo, who was younger, and they were both active in Florence in the second half of the 15th century. This painting was a commission from the Pucci family for their private family chapel. Although it was a private family chapel, it was not a small chapel, it was very large, hence the dimensions of this painting, which is almost 3 meters tall and about 2 meters wide.
The painting, as you see it now, has already been cleaned, so we've removed the previous varnish that had become quite discoloured, and it was really flattening the image, so it was obscuring all of this rich glazy tones in the foreground and also muting the really vibrant colours. You can see the azurite blue of the archer here that's mimicked in the sky. So the painting is currently in its kind of true state without any restoration on it. We've put a new varnish on. All these white areas you see are the fills that we've been putting in. So we've been using a chalk putty to fill areas of loss to the paint and ground layers to bring the losses up to the level of the surrounding paint. At this stage, with all these losses filled, you can really see the kind of patterns of loss across the painting. Mainly, it's in these vertical lines. The panel is comprised of a series of boards, so these vertical lines are where two of the panel boards have been joined together. And we also have the second kind of pattern of damage, which are these tiny little circular holes that you can see throughout the entire painting. And these are due to damage caused by woodworm. So the larvae of the woodworm would live inside the panel and they would slowly eat their way out. All these little holes are where the woodworm have been released into the wild, as it were. But thankfully, all of those little holes had old fill. It was grey and dark brown fill that we know from our records was put in many, many years ago, probably well over a century ago. So we haven't got any new holes and any new woodworm, thankfully.
The painting, for a picture of this age, is actually in fabulous condition, comparatively speaking.
Another really interesting and significant feature of this painting is actually its technique. In around 1475, when this was painted, the majority of artists in Florence were working in a medium called egg tempera, literally grinding their dry pigments in an egg medium. However, this painting is painted in oil. When we were working on this painting, we couldn't help but notice that there are a lot of things that, to our modern sensibilities, we might call defects. So there's lots of drips down in the painting, there's lots of paint being swirled together in a kind of marbled effect. There's different types of cracking. There's really fine cracking, like in this archer here. There's also these really wide cracks in this archer here. So our first thought was this is perhaps these artists getting to grips with a new medium that they weren't very familiar with. However, there are things that we wonder whether they might almost be purposeful. So if we look at the collar of the archer here, these kind of little bobbles that have occurred in this paint, they look like defects, but they also create a texture that's really useful. They almost mimic a kind of fur texture. So could this be the artist actually very purposefully using a new medium to create these kind of textures? How much was intentional and how much was fortuitous, we don't know, but it's interesting seeing these artists get to grip with an entirely new medium.
As well as carrying out the practical treatment, we've also been using the opportunity of having the painting off the wall to carry out lots of different types of technical investigation. And one of those has been infrared reflectography. Infrared reflectography is a wonderful thing because it allows us to see through the paint, and if the artist has used a carbon-rich medium, we're able to see what the initial design was that he or she placed on the support prior to any of the paint layers. So that's a wonderful insight into the compositional design process.
So the likelihood is that a different cartoon would have been used for each of these figures. And so they would have kind of made up a jigsaw of the figures on the panel itself when they were designing the composition. In several areas, they've made amendments from that initial design. Perhaps most obviously down here, the boot has been shifted over to the right a bit just to make some space for that foot of the nude archer.
In this case, it was very clear in the infrared reflectograms that the design was transferred by means of the pouncing or spolveri technique. And we're going to attempt to show you how that's done now.
So the infrared reflectography shows us that the artist didn't actually draw directly onto the panel. Instead, they would have started off with a drawing, and they would have used the method called pouncing to transfer the design onto the panel. So first off, they would have put another sheet behind their drawing, and they would have literally pricked through along the lines like this, through both their drawing and through the underneath paper.
This was a way so that they didn't ruin the original cartoon or drawing.
Because the next step gets slightly messy.
This shows you on the light box, how the holes all go completely through the paper.
And using these holes, they would have taken a rag and put in some ground charcoal into their rag, gathered it up, placed their cartoon on the panel.
Bit messy, isn't it, really?
Yes, and that's why they did it on a separate sheet, not on their drawing, otherwise it ruins it. And they would have just dusted the charcoal through all those little holes and transferred the lines onto the panel itself. So if I remove it, it should now be, and you can see those lines. And now, with the whole figure pounced, it's literally a case of joining the dots. Water with a little bit of ink, and they would have secured those lines by brushing. In the infrared reflectography, you can see these fluid lines which were made with a brush afterwards, as well as the little join dots that they joined together.
The underdrawing of Saint Sebastian is particularly interesting. We have the same sort of dots that we see in the infrared reflectogram, so it's the same method of transferring the design by these little dots. So that's really clear, but we also see in his torso, in the underdrawing, that he has a really defined musculature. So basically, when he started off, he did actually have a six-pack. And it hasn't been transferred into the painting stage, but at the initial design, he did have a much more muscular body. And the reason that's so interesting is that there's a lot of debate about who did what in this painting, which bits were painted by Antonio, which bits were painted by Piero. And Antonio, the elder brother, is generally regarded as the much better artist, more talented artist. And he was especially famous for his mastery of the nude. And Vasari, in his famous biography of the lives of the artists, he tells us that Antonio was the first artist to dissect bodies, to investigate their muscles and anatomy. Now, that may not be true, but it's definitely the case that he was very interested in the nude, in musculature and anatomy. So the fact that Sebastian has this musculature underneath is quite interesting. There's sort of been an idea previously that maybe Antonio did the archers in the foreground because they're the really muscular ones, and then maybe Piero did the body of Saint Sebastian because he's much softer and longer. But the fact that we found the musculature underneath him sort of makes you think slightly differently about it all. Well, hello again. It is now March 2024 and Alysia and I have been very busy working on this painting, which is now in the last stage of restoration. We've been using the scaffolding, but we will move that out of the way now so that you can appreciate the painting better.
We started our retouching quite a long time ago, and we started by addressing all the areas of fill. So that was mainly along splits that run along joins where the panels of the painting are joined, and also woodworm damages which left little tiny holes all over the painting that had been previously filled.
Yeah, this area was really bad, wasn't it, for example? Working along the splits is also very hard because it's between where the wood sort of doesn't join, it's not fully aligned, it kind of dips in like this like a sort of, what would British say, a gull wing. Yeah. So it's very hard because the texture isn't correct. So getting that to, you know, to sort of disappear is really hard. And I'm quite happy with this join at the top here. I think that's looking quite good. And the reason, you know, you want that is you want the continuation of the sky. You don't want that broken up. You want this lovely, these horizontal paintwork in the sky to not be interrupted. So we're trying to bring it all to a sort of even level of finish, and just to restore the integrity of the image and to make it as much as we can as it was when it was first viewed.
And that's one of the things we've really been able to get back through, partly through retouching and also through the cleaning, is this sense of recession in the landscape, because actually a lot of the woodworm damages in the background actually hadn't been completely retouched before. It complicated the image, and you didn't get these kind of sweeping vistas of the paint kind of going back and forth as it recedes back. These kind of winding lines of the river and of the landscape, of the path and things.
And there are also lots of little traits of the artist's technique which might in some lights be considered as faults, like little drips and dribbles, but obviously those are all part of the artist's technique and they're actually quite charming, and we're not going to do anything with them. This is one of the first paintings that was painted in Florence entirely in oil. So it's sort of only to be expected really that the artists, the Pollaiuolo brothers, had some struggles with the medium. There is a new frame being made, carved, and it's going to be painted and gilded. And the painting will put in its new frame beginning of May, at which point it will be ready to go back on display.